In the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody who is joining us today for our Immigrants Rising Entrepreneurship webinar series. Today, we have the great pleasure of having our entrepreneurship fellow, Alessandro Negrete, with us, who's going to be talking about marketing and finances, how social media can lead to fundraising for your startup. And again, we are also live on Facebook on our Facebook group, Entrepreneurs at Immigrants Rising. And so before we get started with the webinar, I am going to briefly talk to you about some of our entrepreneurship programming with Immigrants Rising. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Alessandro. Thank you so much. So we do have a variety of entrepreneurship programming available to individuals. We have presentations that are given in person. There are also virtual presentations where we can go to colleges, universities, nonprofit organizations to talk about entrepreneurship. We have lots of resources, including all previous webinar recordings, as well as corresponding guides and handouts on our resources page. We have a fellowship. Alessandro is one of our fellows, and each year we bring in individuals to support with our entrepreneurship programming, so you can learn more about that. We also have an entrepreneurship fund that grants undocumented entrepreneurs funding to support their projects. In addition to that, we are working on a list that includes organizations that support immigrant entrepreneurs. So you can learn about all our entrepreneurship programming by going to immigrantsrising.org/entrepreneurship. The flyer has hyperlinks to all the different programming that we have related to entrepreneurship. And now I am going to introduce our presenter, Alessandro Negrete. So Alessandro Negrete is a queer, undocumented immigrant of color from Manzanillo, Colima, Mexico. Alessandro, as he is known to friends and community, came to the U.S. with his mother as a 3-month-old. He grew up in South Central, now known as South LA. He's the byproduct of the hoods he has lived in and has called Boyle Heights home since the 90s. After living near many undocumented street vendors for years, his mother became a vendor to support her family. After growing up undocumented and going to school, Alessandro began building his own skills and brand in order to support himself as an entrepreneur. Alessandro has since led policy to advance immigrant rights, built a name for himself through his small consulting practice, and continues to support other community members in accessing resources to become leaders in whatever capacity they choose. Without further ado, Alessandro, the webinar is yours now. Thank you so much for joining us today. And you're on mute, I believe, Alessandro.
Yes, you're right. Bye. Thank you, Ileana, for that very nice introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Alessandro. I live in Boyle Heights. I grew up in LA most of my life. We migrated to this country when I was 3 months old. So really saw a lot of the evolution of street vending, from being, a localized economy to a growing business here in LA. Street vendors bring a large amount of resources to the city, and we have recently passed the street vendor ordinance. In the time before I was working on the street vendor campaign in LA, I was doing a lot of marketing work with brands in the fashion industry. So I come out of the for-profit industry working with Neiman Marcus, Bloomingdale's, and high-end retailers doing a lot of their marketing strategies. That led me into wanting to do more fulfilling work that also supported my community. So I started doing consulting, not knowing what it was at the time. I just thought it was doing work for one brand at a time. It wasn't until I started working, doing some policy statewide with the California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance, that I met a lawyer friend of mine, and she told me about consulting and starting my own LLC. So I really gave that idea some processes and, really focusing on my skill sets and what I really wanted to do. So I started my own sole proprietorship through my consulting and started working with a network of entrepreneurs beyond just street vendors, but other folks, and connecting them. I went to Cal State LA. In my consulting practice, I do marketing, traditional and social media. So that can range from building relationships to news stations or TV stations, branding from ideation to execution, so every step in between. I also do a lot of fundraising coaching, so grassroots grant writing and resource cultivation. And people may think that grants are only for nonprofits, but actually there's a lot of grants and fellowships that are awarded to individuals. So that's the type of work that I do. And I also do a lot of public speaking. Being a queer and documented person, I am one of the 11 million left without status. So I talk a lot about the experience of being an undocumented person that doesn't have DACA or access to a lot of those remedies. And I do public speaking around them. So I know Ileana just mentioned a bit about the entrepreneurship work, but Immigrants Rising is really being a leader in providing resources to undocumented people. Here's what the website looks like. I know Ileana said there's hyperlinks, but this is what you would tap into when you go on Immigrants Rising. You can see highlighted entrepreneurship. And then once you click there, all these pages come out. So it's the webinars, the Accessing Financial Capital, the Undocu Hustle films, which are a great series for folks that are thinking about starting their own business. They have the Worker Cooperative LLCs, and they also have other webinars accessible. So feel free to go check out the immigrantsrising.org website and type in entrepreneurship. So this is a bit about the presentation outline. So one of the things we'll go over is creating an identity. Who is your customer? A lot of times when people think of a business, they don't necessarily have an idea of who their customer are, or at least some of the folks that I've worked with. And so it's really important that you understand who your customer is. 2 is staying true to your brand. And I can't stress this enough. I think that a lot of times people, when you think about Pepsi or Coca-Cola, you immediately think of those vibrant colors, but it's also beyond just the color schemes. Next, after that, we'll talk about developing material that allows you to maximize engagement. Then we'll go into understanding social media. A lot of people, again, just because we're Instagram users, millennials and social media really were the age in which we created influencers, which is really important when you start talking about understanding your social media. Then we're going to go into having an engaging ask with the right platform. So there's a lot of crowdfunding sites that you'll run into, but it really is also about finding the right one for you. And then lastly, we're going to fundraising. So identifying your customer base. So these are 4 easy steps to creating an identity or profile for your customer. Step 1, know your product or service. And this doesn't mean, again, just knowing like your financials, what it's going to cost to run your business. This is about thinking like your customer. This is about hitting the ground, taking notes and understanding like when you're providing a service, who is the person that you are wanting to come to your first? Because you're going to have your tier 1 customer this is the person that will go to you and only you, your tier 2 customer who will go to you or a competitor, and then you have general public. So really understanding what your product is and service to understand what your comparative advantage is really important. And also be honest when you identify who you're talking about. Don't try and fit every single human being into who your customer is. So when you understand your product, you're also better able to understand who your customer is. 2, determine your goals. By determining what specifically you want to achieve will help you alter your strategy when it comes to your customers. This goes into number 1. So once you understand who your customer is, you can stay true to who that customer is so that you would rather have 10 core customers than 100 here or there customers. And that's really what your goal should be, to have that strong base of customers. So you're really using the data you're collecting to make that identity come into fruition. And also understanding that sometimes your strategy might change with the original goal you might have. Build a customer profile. Again, this is it goes hand in hand with number 1. Don't be afraid to go and interview potential clients. When you go out, go into your social circles, and really if one of your friends, one of your family members are part of your customer base, if those are the people that you can foresee will be going to your store or business, then those are the people you should be asking, like, why would you come to me beyond me being your friend? Asking these questions will help also feed into your long-term strategy. So again, once you have that information around who your customer is, you can also plug that into different areas. What's their income? And we'll learn a bit more about that when we go through understanding social media engagement. 4. Number 4 is really remembering your hard work. The information you collect isn't just for you like say you did it, but it's also to put it to practice. Don't let that information collect dust. I think that one of the mistakes that I've seen from a lot of clients is that we do a lot of the groundwork and foundation to find out who to create a customer profile is, and then they start fitting so many things into their store just so that they can have customers, and that's really not successful, and it won't bring in consistent fruition to your business. So branding tips for your social media fundraising campaign. I think a lot of people, I mentioned Coke and Pepsi earlier, but branding, there's a lot of ideas when you think about what are the colors and things like that. So here are some tips for your branding. And we're using the Immigrants Rising website, as we saw earlier, but if you look at Immigrants Rising, the first things that stand out are the resilient blue that you see even in my presentation. As an Immigrant Rising fellow, we definitely stay within color scheme. The color is engaging, blue is vibrant. You see a lot of the same colors in their Facebook, the top right, their Twitter, the top left, those are the same colors. If you look at their website, the first thing you see is that blue from their logo, and that burgundy is also very prominent. So when you're thinking about your business should also use the same idea. Your colors should be the same and uniform in all of your social media. Number 2, use consistent message and mission strategy. The crowdfunding campaigns have consistent language and repetition to ensure success. One example that I'm using here is the Coolest Cooler, which was a campaign on Kickstarter. I think it was Kickstarter or Indiegogo, one of those two. And it was actually able to fundraise over 600% of what their projected goal was. Coolest Cooler, the 21st century cooler that's actually cooler. How many times have you said cooler, right? And the first thing you're looking at is like, oh, is it a cooler or is it just cooler? And there's a lot of playing with words, but the messaging is still there. You're not able to escape the word of what it is, which is a cooler. So plain and simple, having a consistent, thorough message to communicate with your audience is important. So again, using the color schemes, staying within messaging, that also is super helpful. So make sure everyone involved in your business idea knows your brand and vision. So again, this is one of those tips that I express really, really highly, because a lot of people get lost in, if you have a business partner and one of you is describing the business one way and the other one is describing the business another way, that's the quickest way to start losing investment. So you want to have everyone that's involved, be it your mom, your dad, family members and friends, even if they're also ambassadors, and thinking about them as ambassadors, they should be using the same language that you are. So make sure everyone is involved in your campaign knows the messaging idea in and out, so that they're able to capably talk and share about it. Creating a brand and voice guide prior to an event for your business in general and providing it to current and new staff members and volunteers is a premier way to create consistent messaging. So that one's a really cool pro tip. If you create a voice guide, that also allows people to just hand out something and give it to folks. Like, this is who we are. This is our identity. This is what we're trying to sell. Incorporate and promote campaign hashtags. So this is another one that's really nuanced around the influencer age. So hashtags are really important. I use the one that's right there in the middle, as you see, Giving Tuesday, because you can't escape Giving Tuesday without seeing this logo and this hashtag. Every year, once a year, you definitely see Giving Tuesday at least once in your news feeds. And why? Because Giving Tuesday, the organization itself, has been branding itself using that every year, and organizations don't even have to pay to use it. So hashtags are a great way to associate your brand with a conversation on social media. Hashtags help create momentum in feeds by incorporating them to ensure maximum reach. Research your hashtag, and this one's also really important. You don't want to get tied to something that has nothing to do with your business. A little side story, I was working with a client in Maywood that was trying to promote a social change campaign, and they started talking about hashtag we are Maywood. And when you clicked on and they had already been using it prior to me joining them and supporting them. And when you clicked on the link, it was actually taking them to a dispensary. So they were, branded next to a dispensary. So that didn't really help them in their business. So I really suggest that what you're trying to do, always, whatever hashtag you use, make sure that you click on it and research it so that you're able to figure out who's using it and how is the conversation being had on it. Number 5 is thinking about your brand, your partner's brand. So aligning your organization with companies or other nonprofits with similar brands and vision is really important when putting on a giving day. So I put the Super Bowl there because thinking about corporations, when you think about the Super Bowl, what's one thing that all major corporations are aligning themselves with their competitors? Think about Coke again, think about Pepsi. No matter what, they're gonna all advertise on that same day. So the Super Bowl is a great example of how you can think with your partners and think about how everyone is using that day. So think about all your competitors, think about who your brands are, your partners are, and create a situation and moment where you can all benefit from. So, I get this a lot from people. So, oh, I use social media. I think I know how to ask for money. Let's stop right there, take a moment to pause and ask ourselves some of the difficult questions. And this is where we're gonna go into the social media part. We talked about branding, we talked about your customer. Now we're gonna talk about social media and its involvement. So understanding social media. So, one of the things that I always talk to people about is this one in particular is, all your messaging isn't going to be the same for everybody. So young adults, it makes a difference. So young adults 18 to 29 are the most likely to use social media. Fully 90% do, but that doesn't mean that we should ignore our elders. So today, 35% of all elders 65 and older are using social media compared to 2% in 2005. So really understanding your customer, this is one of those pieces that's really important. Gender differences, women and men use social media at similar rates, but women were more likely than men to use social media networks for shopping or to get a service. So today, 68% of all women use social media, where before it was only 62. So again, thinking about your customer, gender does play a small role. Socioeconomic differences, those with higher education levels and household income lead the way. So over the past decade, it's been consistently been that there's cases of houses with more money. 56% of those spend more money on online services. So if you're able to tap into that market, that's also a great advantage that you have. Racial and ethnic similarities. There are now notable differences with ethnic groups. 65% of white people, 65% of Hispanics, and 56% of African Americans use social media today. Community differences. More than half of rural residents now use social media. Those who live in rural areas are less likely than suburban or urban communities to use social media. But today, 58% of rural residents to 68% of residents are using social media. So again, depending on what your service is, what your product is, or what you're selling, these are really important facts to know. And this is just some bullet point examples of how these particular things can help your business. This is a quick source from some of the data that I'm getting. So it's from the Pew Research Institute in Technology. So if you see the gradient, internet users in general from before 2006 have increased, and now all adults. So again, if you're marketing your business to adults, that's a great way to see that all adults are joining social media regardless of age at the same rate as the internet is evolving. So you really want to capitalize on social media by having a great strategic plan. So reading your analytics, this is where the fun part begins. This is where sometimes a lot of the clients that I work with I start losing them because they just assume that everyone's on social media and that there's no strategy to getting something off the ground. So Facebook is Facebook is a great example of one that provides a lot of the data for you. This is an overview of someone's insights. So we're definitely I'm gonna go and show you all where you can find it. I'm using a nonprofit. So basically when you go on your page, when you create a Facebook for your business, it's gonna take you to your front page, which is your public facing page. And It's taking a bit to load. But once it loads, you're going to see, and if you're the manager, you're going to be able to see all the tabs on top, which you see the page, inbox, events, notifications, insights. So that's where you want to get. You want to go into the insights column to start seeing a lot of the information for your business. And it creates a summary like you see here. So we'll go to 28 days. And then you scroll over here to your left and you go into people, because that's when you start seeing a lot of the data. So on Facebook, Facebook categorizes things by two, which is your fans and your followers. If you understand, if you know about social media algorithms, a lot of the algorithms keep changing. So your fans are basically the people that will see your page every day, will like your stuff, will share it. So for this particular entity, their social base is 61% women, 31% men, and it creates some great facts down here of where they're coming from. Your followers, on the other hand, are people that have liked your page. They don't necessarily engage with you, but they want to keep tabs on you. So, you know, there's not big of a difference on this page, but this is where you can find some of that useful data that we were just talking about. So Twitter is another one where we talk about impressions and reach. So we're going to go on the same organization's Twitter. On Twitter, it'll take you to this front facing page. You go up here to your top right to your profile, and you click on analytics. So just for some of you, I don't know if you all do or don't, but even if you're not a business, on Twitter, you can have analytics. So you have to just turn them on. So this is what Twitter looks like when you're looking at analytics. So impressions and reach are two very different things, and we'll talk about them once we get into once we tap out of Instagram. But this is what it looks like on Twitter. So you see top mention is happening here, highlights something that got the most activity, and you can go over here and see the summaries of what you've done. And you can really play around with this data and really see who are the people that are following you. Next, we have this Instagram. To find the analytics, it's right next to your name, and you click on Insights, and it creates these little readable measures that you see on the far right. And then Instagram is a lot easier to digest because it separates. So for example, if you see the business we're looking at, their biggest engagement is from men from the ages of 25 to 34. The typical locations are in London and New York. And one of the things that I really enjoy about Instagram is it also gives you the times on which most of the users that are engaging with you are online. So for example, on here you see that most of the engagement on this particular person's Instagram is between 3 in the morning and 9 p.m. It experiences a dip during the day, but it climbs back up at night. So this must be a club or an entity like that has people from 9 to 3 a.m. fully engaged. Analytic tools. So analytic tools for me are super useful because a lot of the times, as you all just saw, the data is really difficult to read if you're not in the business, which personally, from a lot of my clients, they're not. So I really always encourage people to download analytics tools that make all that information digestible. The one that you see there is quantcast.com. Quantcast is a completely free service if you're just using it for analytics. Once you start thinking about how you are going to advertise, they do have a small fee, or I wouldn't say small, they have a fee. But you know, if you're a startup, I really just suggest you start looking at your analytics before you start advertising, because this really helps commodify everything that's readable, and you're able to process it. So you know, if most of your client is male, 18 to 24, 25 to 34, their household income, their education level, all those things are put into graphs like this on Quantcast. So memes, cat memes, yay. This is where we're going to start talking about generating content. And the platform versus the ask. So, when we think about content, we think about what are some of the differences, because there are so many crowdfunding sites now. But here are three examples. For Kickstarter, I don't know if folks are familiar with Veronica Mars. Veronica Mars was a show from, I think, the 90s. The creator was not happy with the way the show ended, so he kickstarted a campaign to create a movie about the show. And he was able to fundraise about $3 million to get the movie going. So that's one example. GoFundMe is definitely for folks that are trying to start nonprofits or a cause. The image you see there is for folks that might have seen recently the 2 documentaries on the unsuccessful Fire Festival. There was a Bahamian cook that used $50,000 of her own savings to ensure that the people from the Bahamas that worked with her were at least paid. So someone at Vice created a GoFundMe for her, and she was the cause. On Indiegogo, Sondor's electrical bikes, someone used Indiegogo and fundraised over 1,000% of their business through Indiegogo for these electrical bikes. So again, picking the right platform is also really important. So pick the right one that is aligned with your idea. So example of crowdfunding asks, keep it short, make sure it's clear. And by making sure it's clear, I always want to emphasize that you have an ask. A lot of times I've seen people, especially at nonprofits, make something like, we're living in some hard times. And there's no ask, right? So also allowing for people to engage, especially since it's in social media. And if it's in another language, especially since it's social media, try and translate. I have 2 examples for y'all to view. So here's one Indiegogo campaign that some of y'all might recognize, some of you might not. But yeah, this is we'll see the video and you'll see what I mean. If folks have questions, feel free to write them in the chat box and we'll get to them. So this is a fundraiser for Undocumented Tales. It's a YouTube series and this is their video.
Hola, ¿qué tal a todos? ¿Cómo están, mi gente? Espero les hayan gustado los primeros episodios de la serie. Han sido muchas horas, muchos días de grabación. Ha habido más de 80 personas involucradas enfrente y detrás de cámaras. Nosotros mismos hemos puesto de nuestro bolsillo para la realización de estos episodios. Pero queremos seguir grabando. Necesitamos grabar 10 episodios más. Y para eso necesitamos de su ayuda. Necesitamos recursos. We need money. We need money to buy and rent equipment like cameras, lights, C-stands, and normal production things. We also need money to compensate the cast and crew, production design, location, parking, food. Es por eso que si les gusta el proyecto, por favor ayúdenos con donaciones, con lo que puedan. Y si no pueden, por favor compartan el video con sus amigos, familiares, con todo el mundo. Como ustedes saben, tal vez este proyecto no despierta el interés de compañías productoras porque no querrán trabajar con un cineasta indocumentado. Es por eso que en estos momentos los únicos que pueden financiar este proyecto son ustedes, la audiencia. Es por eso que les pedimos, les imploramos que si les gusta el proyecto, compartan, donen lo que puedan. Queremos seguir trabajando hasta el final. Este es un proyecto muy pequeño, pero con un mensaje muy, muy grande. Así que por favor, donen lo que puedan y compartan con todos sus amigos y familiares. Sigan el link para poder donar, por favor. Y muchas gracias por toda su ayuda. Gracias.
So that was Undocumented Tales. That video definitely followed the most critical rules of a video, which is 90 seconds, really engaging. You got tons of visuals. You got a deep explanation of who's involved, what the project is about, the social impact, and they made it about the show, not about them. So a lot of times when you're fundraising for your own business, people have these hesitations because you're essentially fundraising for an individual as opposed to nonprofits. But it's really that honesty and that authenticity that has allowed Armando to continue to grow Undocumented Tales through crowdfunding. The next example I want to show you all is for folks that want to build nonprofits. Through the process of working in the Entrepreneurship Fund, I've seen a lot of interest in folks wanting to start their own nonprofits. And I really spoke with Ileana about giving an example because we want to be supportive. So this next video was built by the Evelyn and Walter Haas Foundation, and they created a video with a bunch of nonprofit fundraisers. I just want to give you all a quick snippet for those of you that want to start a nonprofit, because it's really, those are really the people that are going for that social impact. And it may seem easy, but it's not necessarily the easiest job. And I'm going to start it at 1:30. Bear with me, folks. Well, hopefully it starts in the next couple of minutes, but basically the gist of this video is for folks that are interested in starting nonprofits. A lot of times we get lost in the messaging because as communities of color, we have these weird relationships to money, especially asking for it, right? But when you're in the nonprofit industry, you definitely are not asking for yourself. So that's really where you have to believe in the work for it to allow for you to see and to bringing that money, because you will find those people that get really excited about supporting an issue. And those are the folks that you want to talk to. Those are the people that will help you continue to fundraise for your cause. And the video did not work. Well, if you all want to look it up, definitely you'll see the link on the presentation. Again, telling your story is really important. This is where we talk about fundraising. So telling your story is really important. Why did you come up with the idea? How did you come up with the idea? Letting people know to make them feel like they're connecting with you. Being honest. Make sure you have an actual ask when you're asking folks. You make sure that on all your social media platforms, you have a link so that they can be directly directed to where they can go and get support. And always remember, don't forget to say thank you. There's been a lot of times where I've been to fundraisers and it's an amazing ask, but they never thank people in general. So you always want to keep that humility that's going to allow you to continue to grow your base. And with that, this is time for questions. I am Alessandro again. My LinkedIn is there. You can follow me on Twitter. I post a lot of political stuff. Occasionally, people ask me questions, and I am definitely really quick to answer you. So feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. That was great. So again, for folks that are joining us, this is the opportunity for you to ask any questions related to our webinar or any questions related to the entrepreneurship programming that we have. You may type your questions in the Q&A, or you may type them on the chat. Okay, let's see. I think we have... somebody is asking, Alessandra, I'm assuming YouTube also has its own form of analytics?
Yes, YouTube also has its own form of analytics. The thing, YouTube is actually great when you start engaging with influencers, because you get to maximize by linking them. So a lot of when you tag a video, tagging is much like hashtags. So tagging videos that are already tied to something is a great way to get a lot of traction when people are viewing stuff. So I don't know if folks have seen, people will tag Bad Bunny or things that are currently popular in a lot of things. That's only so that they can be part of conversations without actually being part of them.
Great, let's see. And someone said, could you share the presentation? So all webinars, including this one, are recorded, and the recordings are found on Immigrants Rising -resources. We typically do not share the slides, but we can definitely think about ways to, think about uploading the slides as well. But again, all resources are on our website, immigrantsrising.org/resources. Alessandro, we have another question that came in. What other analytics tools besides Quantcast do you recommend?
I like to look for open source tool, just because a lot of times for startups that's like the easiest thing. But I think that some of the open source tools that I've used, that where you pay a small fee, that I've recommended have been Drupal, or WordPress also has some great tools if you once you develop your website. Magneto, I think those are some of the great resources to track some of the information.
Thank you, Alessandro. And I know that we are going to be working either on a handout or a guide that's going to correspond with the webinar. So on there, you'll be able to get a full list of resources.
Yes, I will be working on a guide, social media guide in general, both in English and translated into Spanish. That's going to be, its focus is going to be more on the analytics piece, the different resources that are out there, because I think that there's some folks that already have their businesses started. So maybe a presentation like this would have been a little junior for them. So I'm going to try and make the guide a bit more robust with explanations on some of the different price points and what you get with those price points on the different analytics tools. But also when you promote an ad versus when you don't promote an ad. I don't know if folks saw when I went on the Facebook, there was a point where you saw promote. But again, I think this presentation was geared more for folks that hadn't had an experience using analytics. So the guide will definitely be a great way for folks that have a bit more, are more versed in understanding social media analytics.
Great, thank you, Alessandro. We have another question that came in. How do I target an audience without offending?
I'm gonna try and answer your question how I'm interpreting it. If you have an example, that would be great. But one, I want to open up by saying that you will never not offend someone. There will be sometimes someone that will be offended no matter what. But what I would say is ask yourself, would you be offended by it? And then again, much like I stressed in the beginning, is looking at your customer profile. Maybe that's a question that you should ask. Would this offend you? Would this offend you? You know, and not being afraid of it, because and it's always a question of like, you know, what is the best strategy? Always assessing what you're doing. So I can't say that there's a definite yes and no, but what you can do is really pull it too with your close friends, because a lot of times those are also going to be the folks that support you.
Thank you, Alessandro. We have another question that came in. How do you handle those offended people on your social media sites?
Delete them, delete the comments. One of the great things about paying for certain services is you can type keywords into your social media platform, and it asks you what you want to do, and it deletes them. A perfect example of that is, I don't know if folks are familiar with the media production team. I will not say the word. I don't know how PG we are, but F Jerry has definitely been able to create a platform, and they started off as Instagram meme makers, and now they're a whole media production and consulting company. And they were some of the first people that started using that ad and comment blocker. So you can set specific words that you might find undesirable on your social media platforms, and have them immediately be automatically deleted without having you to monitor them.
Any other questions, folks? Okay, if there are no other questions, then Alessandro, again, I want to thank you so much for your time today. This was a really great webinar. And again, the recording will be available, as well as some additional handouts or guides that will correspond with the webinar. Actually, let's see. We have one more question that came in, since we do have some time left. how much time should we be spending on social media for our businesses?
I think that if it's an online business, I think as much time as you can. If it's a personal business, also understanding what are your hours of operation. For brick and mortar in particular, if you're open from 9 to 5, you know, a lot of social media and analytics beyond what I just showed will share with you that the best time for social media engagement is really early in the morning, because that's when folks are going to work, and in the evening around 5 to 6, because that's when people are getting out of work. So traditionally, those are the two target points for you to post anything or share anything. But if you're trying to engage, I think it depends on your hours of operation. I personally have sent messages to businesses that are open from 9 to 5 just to ensure that they're open, or if they have a particular pastry that I want to buy. So again, depending on your business, but the best times to really engage with people are really early in the morning when folks are going to work, and in the afternoon when people are leaving out of work.
Great. Thank you so much, Alessandro. And I just realized that I did not introduce myself at the beginning, but my name is Ileana Perez. I am the entrepreneurship strategist with Immigrants Rising. If any of you have any questions about our entrepreneurship programming, you can reach me at ileana@immigrantsrising.org. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Please stay tuned for our upcoming webinars. We do have a great series of webinars from now until May. So you'll hear more information on our Entrepreneurs at Immigrants Rising Facebook group. You can also join our listserv. You can also get the latest updates on our Immigrants Rising website. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time for our next webinar. Thank you so much, Alessandro.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye.